Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to all of our friends across the world where you're watching. This is Purple Soy 22 and Styled Pigeon on the second episode of Gingerly. Did you not love that intro video? Let's go.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about it. It sounds good. It looks good. It's so clean. I'm so happy with the work they did. It's awesome.
And this background video too, man. Look at this. I was just saying I'm going to be so distracted watching the Bitcoins float across the screen. But yeah, big shout out to our friends at Roundly X. They're the ones that sponsored the graphics and the video and all that cool stuff. So yeah, we're sponsored by Roundly X. This is Gingerly, a Bitcoin live show. Roundlyx.com, like I said, is our sponsors. They are a simple to use app that allows you to purchase Bitcoin and other digital assets with your spare change automatically anytime you swipe your card and make a purchase. The set it and forget it DCA or dollar cost averaging tool helps you build wealth safely and conveniently over time. And it helped me pay off my Subaru in a time of financial stress during the pandemic. So check them out, roundlyx.com. How you doing today, Style Pigeon? I'm really excited to dive in.
I'm so excited to dive in. I think we're talking a little bit about Web3 today, if I actually read all of the promotional stuff that was going out this week.
Yeah, what you should know about Web3.
Since we're only doing this every other week right now, it's actually something that's comes at me a lot faster than I think it would. And every time it's like this really big build of like my hypertension's through the roof every time because I'm so
It's
excited.
show week.
It's been too long.
Yeah, I'm really excited. One of these days we'll move to every single week, but we're scaling up. We're getting better. Obviously, you can see
That's
from
right.
episode 1 to 2, we're making lots of improvements. So, big thanks to BitcoinLive guys for producing the show. And let's dive in. A lot of people these days hear about what is Web3. If you scroll through Twitter, look at even headlines in mainstream media. Web3 is a term that's slung around all the time.
Yeah, I completely agree. Although I will say, from the like semi outsider's perspective, Web3 doesn't get talked about as much as you guys think it does. So let's not forget that there is still an adoption equation going on here that we have to explain what it is before people can actually start talking about what it is.
For sure. And like if I were to just like ask most people, if you have heard of Web3, first of all, probably you're right. Average person hasn't heard of like what Web3 is. But if you have heard of it, people that I talk to, they throw out terms like, oh yeah, like that's like NFTs, right? Or, that's that DeFi stuff that I've heard about, or those meme coins, right? Or stuff like that. And that's all kind of valid. All of those things fall underneath Web3. And I think that's a lot of great Gingerly episode content that we can dive into. But what I wanted to do today is just kind of have a discussion about what Web3 actually is from like a high level. We can talk about various aspects of it, but I really kind of want to go back in history and kind of walk through like Web 1 and 2 first to kind of give our listeners an idea of where we've come from, like what the internet used to look like to where it looked like when we were growing up, right, to the mid 2000s. To now where we're moving now and how Web3 impacts that.
That sounds awesome. Actually, I was thinking I might be able to do some of the intro for Web 1 because that's actually, going through Web 1 and getting into Web 2 is kind of what I know a little bit about. So why don't I do that? And then you can correct me, fill in the gaps where my knowledge isn't sufficient. Sound good?
Before we dive in, I want to just say, like, I have a resource that I prepped Nick with. When I say Web3 is much more than just NFTs or DeFi or anything like that, that means a lot. So Nick, if you wouldn't mind throwing up that first image, not just NFTs for Web3. Essentially, this image shows a view of the NFT ecosystem. Big thanks to my friend 0x Minion on Twitter for putting this together. But look at this. I mean, it's so small on screen, you can barely see it. We'll link it in the description so people can go look at the actual image. But this is just one person's research on just the NFT fi or like the NFT ecosystem in Web3 right now. Tons of companies that are in here doing stuff. And it's not just DeFi either. You can make this same chart with DeFi organizations or decentralized finance. So we're not going to get this granular, right, in this episode. We're going to look at NFTs and DeFi later. like I think a great. So we'll let you start off with an intro to Web 1, and then we can move on to the Ethereum.org resource that I've got that kind of gives a full overlay. But so why
Yeah,
don't you
that's
kick it off?
perfect. That's
Yeah,
perfect. Yeah. Okay. So the history of Web 1. Web 1, the big thing that we want to make sure we point out about the essence of what actually was Web 1 is it's the initial instance of the internet, and it was read only. So essentially is and correct me if I'm wrong here, essentially
sure.
it's a big catalog of resources, just like a library would have, a card catalog. We just figured out a way to make that card catalog digital, and then have digital things on the other side of that somebody
Yeah,
had typed up, or maybe as a piece of code or something that would run, but it's still only you can look it up in the index and find it and then read it.
right,
That's all Web 1 was. So for those people who are not super tech savvy, this is back when you had like MapQuest, and you would look up directions, and in order to like zoom out the map, you would have to refresh the whole page.
right.
That's because it's actually having to go back to that index again, get that whole new list of information, and then bring that back to you.
So
So,
something like MapQuest would be like one of the most interactive things that you would be able to do. Like most of the time, it would just be like you said the word catalog, and it
mhm.
immediately made me think of like the old J.C. Penney and Sears like catalogs that used to be shipped
Oh
out
yeah,
to
yeah.
people every year. So that's kind of like what Web 1 was. It was taking those big clunky like physical print things that people used to use as a resource and just put it online so that it was more accessible, less cost, all like this stuff.
Right, which is a huge amount of connectivity. Like, let's
Oh yeah,
not denigrate how big of an accomplishment that was. I mean, the fact that, my parents still have like a full rack of encyclopedias at our house, but it's such a like archaic thing now to see, which I still think they're valuable because, like,
oh me too.
if
Yeah,
everything hits the fan, so to speak, I still want to have, that information at my fingertips. And I also like the smell of books. So they're
right.
valuable in that. But now we're actually moving into way beyond what Web 1 was. The big step, and this is one of my favorite web related stories actually. Have you ever heard of Sammy Kamkar?
I've heard the name, but for our viewers who
Okay.
haven't, you should dive in for a little bit.
So the thing that I thought was so cool about the transition from Web 1 to Web 2, when I first heard about it, because I felt super special when I first heard about it. It was one of those things where it's like, "Ooh, I knew something like specially secret about the internet and how it works."
Right,
Was because most people don't know that we have been running Web 2. If you don't run in circles of devs or whatever, no, most people don't care. So everybody remembers MySpace. Then some people actually remember these T-shirts that eventually went around that said "Sammy is my hero" on the T-shirt. Do you remember those?
yeah, totally. Yep.
Okay, okay, cool. So the reason that "Sammy is my hero" became so popular was actually because of a worm that a gentleman by the name of Sammy Kamkar wrote. And a worm is just a little piece of code. And because of the way that Web 1 works, he was able to actually inject this code into people's MySpace pages. Well, accidentally, it blows up like crazy overnight. And this was, according to him, this was unintentional, but he ended up actually shutting down MySpace after like a 24-hour period or something, which at the time was the biggest website on the internet.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
it was that much of a big deal. It was like him shutting down Amazon, Google, and Facebook all at the same time for those
Right.
days.
Right.
So obviously, he got in crazy amounts of trouble for this. I don't think he was allowed to touch a computer for 3 years or something.
Wow.
But that exploit was actually specifically what started the cascade of events that led to the development of Web 2,
Yeah.
was him shutting down MySpace, because they're like, oh my gosh, like this is a massive hole in the infrastructure that we're using to do business and
Right.
e-commerce and all of this stuff. So that came out with the eventual advent of Web 2, all because white hat hacker
One
was
guy.
messing around with a computer because he liked to make like Counter-Strike mods or something.
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally.
it,
I mean, it's amazing how that works in internet history. Usually, it's some just
yeah.
small memed something kind of almost that blows up. But no, that's a great point, or a great transition from Web 1 to Web 2. Nick, if you wouldn't mind pulling up that Ethereum.org summary. For those of you who are watching, whenever this is in a video format, we'll have this linked in the description below. I found this very helpful in terms of just reviewing what Web3 is from a history perspective. So they go through and they look at Web 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind scrolling down just a smidge, Nick, there you go. So yeah, Web 1, 1990 through 2004, and then what Style Pigeon's describing 2004 through arguably the present, although we could say, we're moving to Web 3, is the Web 2 era. And so just put super simply, when I say Web 1, yeah, I think read only, right, for the internet. Web 2 is read and write functionality. So diving into this a little bit more, like personal blogs was a big deal back then. Like people couldn't actually just go and write. I mean, Reddit, MySpace, these platforms that allowed users to share their own life with other people was the big move of Web 2. Like to the Sammy point, right? It was a user inputted
Mm-hmm.
thing that ended up affecting the entire internet. And it was kind of
Right.
like the welcoming of consumers into the internet, right? It wasn't just big corporate people or people who knew how to code throwing up these databases and static pages. Now people could log onto the internet and actually participate. And since I'm a
Yeah.
big UFC fan, I've been reminded of this recently. Me and my wife are watching through a lot of old UFC back in the early 2000s. So we just finished 2005. And it was really cool because just all of a sudden they started advertising their new website that you could actually go and interact with. Because previously it was just the schedule, right? You could log on and you
Right.
could
Right.
see,
It's just a
okay,
page.
exactly. But then UFC.tv provided forums. And then, like, literally, Joe Rogan used to spend, he even said he would spend hours on this forum just talking crap with MMA people about what's coming up.
Yeah.
So it's a great way to think about Web 2. It's like user inputted participation into the system.
Yeah, so Web 1, read only. Web 2, you can read and write. So there's an interactive quality to that internet. But I did want to point something out that it wasn't necessarily exactly what you mentioned, but it's crazy to me as we talk about the history of this, how the internet itself, like that technology, almost seems to make Bitcoin inevitable to me.
Mm,
Not
yeah.
to pull a Thanos, but it kind of makes it inevitable because of the fact that the internet was a decentralization motif to begin with. The whole
Mhm,
theory behind let's take information and go boom to
right.
everyone. That's decentralization. Then you have Web 2. Okay, now we're having information sharing
Mhm.
be decentralized to everyone. What if we were able to take that to the next scaffolding or the next level of scaffolding? What does that look like? So since you're the expert, why don't you go ahead and tell me what that next little bit of scaffolding is probably going to look like now and into the near future?
Yeah, for sure. So to answer that question, I think we should finish off the last chapter of Web 2 because
Yes,
Ethereum.org's
please do.
resource says, it's 2004 through the present. But I think that we're pretty much at the end of that, and it's for one major problem. You said that the internet ended up being a sharing of information with everybody that's connected.
Hmm.
And that introduced a major problem because it was both consumers and corporations that were able to share all this information. And
Right.
unfortunately for us, the corporations realized really quickly that consumers are just willing to just give them their personal data that's as valuable to them as like oil is to the United States. You know what I mean? Because how do you think that when you're scrolling through Instagram or scrolling through Twitter and you thought of that trampoline cover that you saw while driving down the road, and now you have an Instagram ad for it? You never said anything out loud, you never searched for it. It's because they've so completely bought up all of our personal data from this decentralized sharing that Web 2 like has, right? That unfortunately, since certain systems, like if you move down the layers, people say all the time, well, if you don't like, um, X social media platform, just move to something different or just create your own platform or something like that. Well, then you
Hmm.
move back a step to, well, okay, I don't have access to social media. I want to create my own thing. So I create my own thing. Now you have to host it somewhere. And who controls the
Hmm.
hosting? Like Amazon controls the hosting, or like GoDaddy controls your domain. And so those corporations snatched up the ownership of the gateway to Web 2. So to participate, you have to by de facto play by the accepted rules that have been created by the Web 2 oligarchy, if you want to get complex here. But the large, I mean, it's no
No, I mean that
mystery.
is what an oligarchy is, though. Is they
Yeah,
have the power, they have the resources to control what happens in reality. That's what an oligarchy is.
yeah.
They rule through power and influence, and things like Web 2 still allow oligarchs to be on the rise.
Right. And case in point, I think, this last thing I'll say here is that this was very much illustrated to me a year or two ago, maybe about a year ago, when Amazon Web Services was either maliciously attacked or had some sort of outage that caused them to be down for like 6 to 8 hours. Like, it was one of the longest periods of time that Amazon Web Services has been out that I know of. And since we so rely on Web 2 and the connectivity by Internet of Things, like, our phones connecting to our house to let us in, to control our temperature, all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, Amazon Web Services going down caused people to be locked into their office buildings that were controlled by Alexa powered devices that they couldn't access, and they were literally locked into buildings. So it's like, that's kind of the completion of Web 2, like needing a transition, right, to the
Right.
next thing. And it's very obvious, but the resistance has been much stouter. Boom. Thank you, Nick. This is why we have a Bitcoin live show, because of speedy resources like this. Yeah. So go check out this story and you can see what I'm talking about. I remember seeing on Twitter, literally some of my crypto Twitter friends were like actually locked into their houses or into their office buildings because this all went down. But so then, as you kind of set up, we need a solution, right? We need to move forward. Web 2 move to Web 1, or Web 1 move to Web 2, because we realized we have to have consumer input. Now we're realizing, through all of the fraud and the information theft and all the bots that are all over Twitter, why are there so many bots? Because they want to harvest your data. So the proposed solution with Bitcoin and with Web 3 things like NFTs and DeFi is, we, the consumers, take the control back of that information as if we own everything. It's like our data.
I really, man, it really stinks that we have to talk about it in these terms. Like, okay, so I'm against violence. I don't like violence. Violence is something that's marred human history for forever. And I really wish that it could go away. I'm one of the people that, like, I just want us all to get along
Yeah.
and treat each other right and be as good a people as we can be. And it it's really unfortunate to me that we always have to talk about this in revolutionary terms,
Mm.
but it's what's happening. In order for us to reclaim that lost territory, we will actually have to fight for it. I hope not violently. I hope that we can fight with, via the law, and actually property ownership is what's so crucial to
Right.
me. Is, the government can't control everything and still claim that we have freedom.
Right. No, yeah, I mean, you're 100% right. So that's a great point, and that kind of moves us towards what Web 3 is, which is taking back ownership of data through blockchain services. I know blockchain is a, I don't know, like, hype word that a lot of people kind of just roll their eyes at when they hear it. But the reality is that it's one of the few technologies that allows us to cryptographically prove that one person has complete control over the asset in question. And because Web 3, or excuse me, because blockchain and cryptocurrency have been growing just as fast as the internet have, it's not just transacting cryptocurrency anymore. We figured out that, like, through NFTs, like, you can have a profile picture that's tied to you that you, like, completely own. But taking that a step further, we could integrate that sort of technology into a governmental database that's your ID. And you wouldn't have to rely on a government agency to provide you your ID, because your ID is verifiably owned by you in this particular place. And all you have to do is cryptographically sign a message that says, yeah, I control all this data, without having to give up control of the data. That's the cool part about Web 3, is that it allows those people like us, consumers, who just want to, like, operate in the broader economy, to be able to participate through monetary payments, through ID provision, without actually giving up that data to a third party.
So now we mentioned like small but very important benefits and whatnot, and I think that's kind of what you're getting at. Can you give me like what's your go-to use case for people who are going, well, I don't know about this Web3 thing, man.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the easiest one that's easy to just kind of wrap your head around the convenience of is healthcare.
Okay.
Let's say for a second that we all a lot of us are moving towards mobile based identity solutions, payment methods, that sort of thing. So it's not out of the ordinary to tell someone like, I mean, you show a QR code and you scan your phone and, Starbucks knows that it's you and they add their loyalty points kind of thing. What if, so the healthcare system is super confusing. No doctor really has your complete records unless you go to the other doctor and request that they send your records over here. And then this doctor makes changes that may not get uploaded to that other doctor's place. And it's just this big hassle all the time. What if you had a solution where you had all that information, all your private health history is in one little app on your phone that you control? It has a fingerprint password or just a normal password. You scan it when you're at the doctor, and all of the relevant information that that doctor needs can be pulled from your health history without you actually having to relinquish control or like submit paperwork to that doctor. It's something that you grant permission to that can then be revoked afterwards. And I think that might be the most important key when you're first thinking about Web3 is the revocation aspect, right?
Mm,
Because right
yeah.
now you can't say, I want my data back from like anybody, right?
Right. Once it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
That's why I personally that's why I'm showing my face actually. It's because like I thought about kind of doing some anonymization type
Hmm.
something or other, whereas wearing a mask or something like that. And before I realized I was just trying to be cool.
Yeah.
But it's like it's gone. Everybody,
Yeah.
if you want to know what I look like, you're gonna figure it out.
Pretty easily. Yeah, exactly. And so that's the root problem that Web3 aims to solve. And I think that a lot of people kind of just ignore that and they dive into like, oh, Web3 is a scam because of NFTs, because of shitcoins, because of DeFi and all this kind of stuff. But it's like, no, like Web3 in and of itself is a way that humans interact with the internet. It's not
Hmm.
about crypto and it's not about blockchain. It's about upgrading the way that we do life digitally. And to the individual person, if you just said, would it be nice if there were no bots, if there were no spam, if you didn't have to like give your email address to everybody every time you check out at some random store, if you weren't tried to force to like get a credit card every time you go to Sears or like Macy's or whatever, you know what I mean? I'm dating myself a little bit, but you know what I'm saying? Like, so all of that could be a thing of the past if we just figure out the correct path forward with Web3. And I think it might take a MySpace worm event like you were talking about at the beginning that's the catalyst for this because this stuff exists. But as you said at the beginning of the episode, adoption is kind of the problem, right? Like
Yeah.
most people just aren't aware of this and it's going to take something that blows up to get people on the right page, I think.
So I see two major inlets to genuine adoption of Web3. The first of which is a philosophical inlet, which I can talk about a little bit, but the other one is actually the financial inlet. So with you're talking about the MySpace event or the Sammy is my hero event for Web3. I think that cryptocurrencies have started to drive some of that. But one of the things that needs to happen is, unfortunately, and I wish to God this didn't have to happen, but I think that some of the fiat is going to start having some real big problems coming up soon. Now, not a financial advisor and genuinely don't know what I'm talking about, but that seems to be what's going to happen that leads to all of this Web3 finance. Then that finance seems like it's going to be able to feed back into Web3 as a whole, just to kind of give it some legs, so to speak. Does that sound like, is that what
Yeah,
you
yeah.
think is probably going to go down?
Absolutely. But one thing that I think is a major like asterisk caveat to what you just said is that
Hmm.
corporations have incredible advantage and control in a Web2 circumstance. And
Mhm.
something that I see as a crypto expert, I don't even like using that word, a crypto nerd. I study it a lot. Don't understand it fully.
Enthusiast.
Enthusiast. There you go. Web3 people like NFTs and stuff like that, crypto, they're trying to like copy Web2 systems with Web3 mechanisms.
Mhm.
What I mean is they're trying to retain control of their audience's data in super unhealthy ways that essentially causes Web3 systems to fail. So, why do you think
Yep.
that we see hacks all the time in Web3? Why do you think that these people are making off with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of crypto and NFTs? For what I just said, the founders are human, they're selfish, they want the money, right? And so, the money is in not just selling the crypto, but also in exploiting the data, especially the private seeds of their customers. So that's where we're at right now, and that's why Web3 has such a bad reputation, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it does have a bad reputation. Actually, I've shared some stuff on Twitter that I know that you saw with a YouTuber that I actually really like. And sorry, Nick, I didn't anticipate us pulling this up, but the gentleman's name is Jazza, it's Jazza, and he does awesome art content. I love his art content because I do the NFT art and stuff on the side. He does wonderful content, but he did do an episode digging into NFTs where he did some really surface level research and I think watched a documentary or something and then kind of came out and was like, "Well, I don't know about these NFT things," you know.
Yeah, yeah,
And I really, it was one of those moments, just like when I listen to Joe Rogan or somebody, where I want to be in the room at some point. I was like, man, if
yeah,
I just like, there's this 3 line thing that I want to say that would change this conversation completely, and I couldn't be in the room because he doesn't know who I am.
yeah. I mean, well, hey, maybe that'll change one of these days. Jazza, if you're watching, we're gonna sync up with you and talk about NFTs.
Oh, I mentioned him on the show. I'm definitely tweeting him after this to be
Heck
like,
yeah.
"We're gonna teach you about NFTs."
That's awesome. I mean, I would welcome that. It'd be super fun to like have someone in that, I mean, is opposed. I love those
Yeah, yeah.
conversations. But I mean, that's a great example because it gets back to the very beginning point that I had, which was when you say Web3, most people think NFTs, and they immediately write it off because they're like, oh, it's
Mhm.
just it's a JPEG, right? That's all. And we can talk about how NFTs are not JPEGs only in a future episode. But you're missing the whole point, right? If you go to someone and you're like, okay, let's forget about NFTs for just a second. We're still talking about Web3. Wouldn't it be nice if you could control all of your own personal information, not just about I haven't even talked about your own financial information. Do you really think that central banks are not sharing your data with everybody? There is no incentive for them not to share your data. There's money there. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the government is severely lacking when it comes to laws about, data breaches. At this point, it's just slaps on the wrist and small monetary fines. And banks like, I mean, Wells Fargo gets slapped on the wrist yearly. So does JP Morgan. I mean, Bank of America does too. They get these hundreds of millions to $1 billion fines for, oh, you leaked all your customers' information. Don't do that. And then, they're still being loaned money and we're still in this perpetrated system. Um, so, yeah, I mean, I wish that people would come at it at that angle to start off with. But I understand why people go after NFTs instead. Yeah, there we go. Here's a great look at this. Thank you, Nick. This is just over the last couple months, but it's constant. I mean, it's constant. And this right here is the state of Web 2, ladies and gentlemen. What you're seeing is all of your data, all of your sensitive information, and in some cases, even your money, like it's just siphoned off and then it's gone, right? So, like Pigeon said, Bitcoin is like a precursor to a new era of privacy because Satoshi Nakamoto realized what was happening in 2008, and we're seeing a recurrence of that exact same situation right now. Unfortunately, like you said with the fiat thing,
Yeah.
I was just recently this morning I was reading a piece, and no pressure to find this, Nick. I know it's super niche, but like essentially there was multiple groups of hotels in the EU that go into the government saying, "Hey, look, our energy costs were 44K annually last year. This year they're projected to be like 160K, and we can't pass that cost on to our consumers because all of these people are already struggling. I mean, inflation's real for me, even, like my grocery costs have more than doubled in the last couple months. And these hotels are like, we understand that we're going to go out of business if you, the government, don't do something. And what do you think they're going to do? They're just going to print more money, right? So
Right. Well,
without
they don't have any actual recourse to
no,
fix what's going on.
no, yeah, I mean we're digging into a hole, and at this point, you got to keep digging, you know.
Yeah.
And I do hope, like you said earlier, you know, it's a shame that these things tend to be more revolutionary. I
Yeah.
agree, but then I also point back to things like you said, the Sammy is my hero thing. Web 2, like, was that like revolutionary? I mean, not like a lot of people were harmed necessarily from one perspective, you know. 2000, the early 2000s were not the best financial times, but if you're looking back compared to now, we're like, wow, like that was pretty good, right? So a transition from Web 1 to Web 2 kind of went better than I would have expected if I was in the midst of it having this conversation back then, you know.
Yeah.
And so maybe, you
Oh
know,
yeah.
maybe we'll be in a better place. Like maybe someone like El Salvador, or I don't know who's going to do it. I mean, Germany's in a pretty rough place. Somebody's got to step up as a country or even a state or something like that and just say, we care about our citizens. We're going to move to this model where they control their data. And that's a very different branch off than we're going to create a centralized bank digital currency that the state controls, because that's cutting all of
That's
the
the
good part
opposite.
about Web 3 and then turning it into like a dictator, complete control kind of situation.
Yeah, that's the exact opposite of what we want. That's
Yeah.
literally the antithesis of what we're trying to accomplish with Web3. That's actually something that really scares me. I don't want to get involved in that at all
Yeah.
because it's like a Kurt Vonnegut short story. You know, like
Yeah.
it's so dark to think about, and it's like Orwell would be rolling over in his grave,
Probably
watching
is.
some of the stuff that's happening.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
And
anyway,
it's
sorry.
unfortunate. Hey, it happens it's happening in China right now. Like
Yeah, exactly.
the
We're
systems we're
watching it.
talking about in fear like currently exist. So it's only a matter of time before we're challenged in like either going that direction or pushing back and going in more of a consumer focused, like citizen focused way.
That actually brings me back to the philosophical advent of Web3. So I have a degree in linguistics, and something that comes along with linguistics is the topic of semantics, or like what words actually mean. And as you get into semantics, that's borders a topic called semiotics, which is the meaning of things or objects or ideas in general, as opposed to just with being restricted to language. And semiotics is a field that I think should be talked about a lot more. Umberto Eco is actually a really popular semiotician who did a lot of really interesting work specifically in regards to language. I just asked Nick to go ahead and pull up an example of his book, or one of his books. He's written many. This is one of the more canonical ones on semiotics specifically. But the reason that this is so relevant is because understanding what the things around you mean is actually one of the most helpful ways that you can get out of the cycle of simply being told what to think or what's real. And what's happening right now that Web3 is going to help us with significantly is by allowing us to call things what they actually are, not what somebody else wants us to think that they are.
Mm.
Because that's the difference between us owning property and us not owning property. If I can point at a piece of land and say that this belongs to me, I get to do what I want to right here. Now, we all agree as a nation in the US in our case, right? There are certain things you can't do even if it is yours, right? You can't murder people on that land. You can't you know, make nuclear bombs on that land. You just can't. Okay, this is good for society as a whole. We're going to try to head off some of those really big mistakes. But other than that, generally in a free society, we should be able to do what we want to. At the very least, there shouldn't be somebody who tells me, no, you can't cut your grass that way. There's a line in there somewhere. And if we don't think about and really concentrate on what those things mean in the same way that Umberto Eco explores in a lot of his writings, he actually also wrote a book. It's called, I think it's called On Beauty, and he did another called On Ugliness. That actually goes back over the history of art, or visual art specifically, and talks about how these ideas have developed and what they actually mean to human beings. And it's a wonderful topic to dive into, especially when we're trying to understand these really heady concepts like what is Web3. I really, really like being able to incorporate some of that in there as well. And also want to mention on Truth and Lies in a non yeah this is the on beauty. It's an excellent exploration. It's a lot of it's visual, but I highly encourage anybody who's interested in things like Web3 to also don't be afraid to open your reading habits outside of that a little bit, because all of these ideas stack on top of each other. We're not just talking about technology, we're also talking about ideas, and we're talking about technology and ideas at the same time. They're in the same exact place. This is the kind of stuff that the founding forefathers actually did in the French parlors before they came up with the idea of the Constitution, right? That's,
Yeah.
I know it sounds super narcissistic for me to say something like that. And I'm sure that I'm not the one that's going to come up with the brilliant ideas. But if I can be involved in pushing brilliant people to come up with those brilliant ideas, then I'll be the cheerleader. That I'm totally cool with that level of involvement, and trying to, follow along. So this is actually an essay written by Friedrich Nietzsche, that's all about the ideas and things that have actually led up to what Web3 is.
Mm.
And like democracy, I guess you could say. He actually goes into great detail in this wonderful essay about where language comes from specifically.
Hmm.
And language, I think, actually comes from a very similar place that Web3 is going to come from, because it actually discusses the legislative quality of language, and eventually we're going to have this legislative quality integrated somehow with our technological aspects on the internet, right? So if we can somehow bridge that gap here, I think that takes Web3 and makes it, oh, this cute little technology, and that's what the ideas that are going to be layered on top of it are what makes it the massive revolutionarily scaled technology that we want it to be.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
sorry.
yeah. No, I mean
Climbing
that
down
was
off the
great.
soapbox.
That was great. I mean, that was also like a good overview of what we want to accomplish with Gingerly, right? So my whole thing when people ask me, "Oh, what your show is about?" Like I cleverly say, we want to gingerly introduce people to concepts they should be thinking about with crypto, NFTs, Web3, all that good stuff. So we hope that if you're watching, when you watch, hopefully like you're getting started, or maybe you've been in crypto for a little while, and you want to dig your teeth in more, you want to learn some more stuff. Our goal is to present ideas that you should be thinking about that maybe you can take back and apply to your job or what you're working on, your project. And we want to supply you guys with lots of resources that you'll be able to use to DYOR, do your own research, dive in, and get to know the field better, because it's people like you who are watching that are going to make Web3 into what it should be, into the privacy, philosophically strong like move from Web 2 that we desperately need. So
I
yeah, I mean, I'm
completely
I'm
agree.
really
Like
happy to be here.
we can cheerlead as much as we want, but it's actually ultimately the listeners, the people who are going to drive this adoption. If nobody adopts it, then it's not going to work. Just like chainsaws, right? Sorry. Uh,
That's I know what you're
so
talking about.
I did
Yeah,
some
go ahead.
logging for a little while. I was involved in like trail building, and I'm game of logging certified with a chainsaw through Soren Erickson or whatever, the game of logging school. And when chainsaws first came about, everybody's like, "This is a horrible idea," because at the time you couldn't run gas powered anything on like BLM land in the U.S.
Mm,
Like you,
right,
you just couldn't take them back into the backwoods with you, because also chainsaws were like the size of a truck, right?
right.
So all of the old school loggers were like, I'm good with my crosscut and my axe. Thanks, buddy. But now obviously everybody uses a chainsaw anywhere where
And
it's
that I
legal.
mean, that's a great analogy. That's a super great analogy. It's like mobile phones, like or even the internet itself. There's a famous Good Morning America video in 1994 of the anchors being like, "Now, what is this internet thing?" And they're like, "I
Oh,
think you
nice.
can maybe send messages or something." Like I don't. It sounds like a fad, and now here we are, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the future is up to you people. We're here with you. We want to support everybody. And I guess kind of to wrap it all up, I have one final resource that I want to leave you guys with that you can go read and maybe give us some feedback. Like when you see our stream under Twitter or on YouTube, comment and let us know like what you think. So Forbes did an excellent piece. It's entitled Web3 Will Make or Break Social Media. And when you think about what we've talked about today, about taking that ownership back, you can understand how social media giants like Zuckerberg and like Twitter and all these people are scared of Web3 because it takes away their profit mechanisms, right? Like they make money off of our data. And this piece does a great job about not necessarily taking a side, but just examining the data and then kind of leaving it up to you. Like, what do you think? So we'd love to hear from you if you have comments or feedback about that article on your own opinion about where you think Web3 will go, or even some crazy niche, like new way that you think Web3 will change, the future. Because it's not just about social media. It's not just about, money. It's about a lot more than that. So we'd love to hear from you. Definitely read up on the resources that we've provided. And that's about all I got. Style Pigeon, anything else you want to say before we wrap it up?
Oh, the other thing you should comment on, by the way, is all of the new graphics and stuff. The intro, spoiler alert, you're going to get to see an outro video section too. So we're super excited about it. We're super happy with the work that's been done. We're trying our best to bring you guys a show that's entertaining as well as informative. So hang in there with us, and we're going to get this thing right and teach you a little bit about Web3. And if you want to mention a couple sponsors or something as well,
Oh yeah,
John,
no,
you can go ahead and
absolutely.
do that.
Yeah, I can wrap us up. So we are a bi-weekly show. So you'll be seeing us again in 2 weeks from now. Hopefully we want to make that weekly, but we are gingerly a Bitcoin Live show. Big thanks to Bitcoin Live team for producing and getting all these awesome resources up for us. Super great. We're sponsored by Roundly X, the acorns of cryptocurrency. You can round up your purchases into whatever crypto and digital currency you like. I'm Purple Suede. This is Style
I'm
Pigeon.
Style Pigeon.
And
Oh, we
this is
almost hit
Gingerly.
it. We almost did
Almost hit
it
it.
perfectly.
Yep, so close.
Next time.
Next time. All right. Well, appreciate you guys. Hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.